I hear you're in Korea at the moment. Is that correct?
I am in Busan, the second largest city in Korea. Yes.
Fabulous. All right. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But I tell you where I'd love to start, because there's so much interesting things that are going on in the world right now that we could be talking about. But just because there are so many of those who are on this call from around the world who are putting some of the money into investing, who are themselves interested in traveling as well, I'm going to actually start way back at the time when I was at university, and I heard about you going on your bike trip around the world. Then I read your book. And for anyone who has not read either the Investment Biker book or the Adventure Capitalist book, I highly recommend it. I know we have some younger audience here, might not been around when those came out. But in both those cases, I was like, wow, here's somebody, especially because when you started the Quantum Fund with George Soros, he was there continuing with the whole investment. Being with our IPO recently, I spent the time in Wall Street. Manhattan can be a place which is just so off from the rest of the world. And here you were traveling around the world. If I just give a couple of stats so everyone can hear this as well. The very first one, which was the bike trip, 100,000 miles on a motorbike, 1,100 days, 245,000 kilometers. That's for the metric in you. And at the same time, in the Guinness Book of Records for the around the world trip, 116 countries. And when I read the book and saw that you were following your passion of learning about economies, investing as you were going, which meant you could actually be profiting from the trip as you're doing it, and then doing the same thing afterwards, that with the Adventure Capitalist trip as well, and then covering 245,000 kilometers on that trip. And in both those cases, it's just have that whole global mindset of having a lifestyle as well. I wanted to start with that because that actually inspired me on my journey. I ended up traveling out to Singapore and then going out to Bali with my family because I really wanted to put lifestyle first, and then from there really start to learn from there. I would love to hear from you and for you to share with everyone your values, right? Like what made you decide to do those, and how that's led to the decisions you've made through life to be really a global citizen.
Well, Roger, it sounds like you've had quite a nice life yourself. I grew up in a very small town, very small, in the backwoods of Alabama. My phone number was 5. That's not a typo. My phone number was one digit, 5. So I guess most people who grew up in places like that never leave, or they wind up like me and they want to see the world. So for a long time, I wanted to see the world, and I've had motorcycles for a long time, and I knew that that's the best way to do anything. You're much closer to it. It's a lot more fun. It's exhilarating to ride a motorcycle. So for a long time, I was a little nuts, and I wanted to go around the world on a motorcycle. By the time I was 37, I had made more money than I knew existed in the world. And not very much now by today's standards, but in those days, it was a lot of money. And so I retired to set off to have adventure in my life. I know that if I'd stayed working, I'd have a lot more money, but Roger, I'd have a lot more experiences and to me, a more wonderful life by having adventure and seeing the world. I've been around the world twice. I've moved to Asia. I've done various and sundry different things because I wanted to have a different life.
When you actually were traveling around the world, and I know you were one of the very first at a time when people weren't necessarily believing that China was going to have the growth it was going to have, where you were already seeing that was going to be taking place. And there was a lot of other observations you made, many of them which all came true as well. What would you say were the big surprises as well as you went around in terms of what you were learning about different places? And to what extent would you, just off your experience of that, encourage others to be out there traveling to really get a better perspective as well?
Well, if people weren't around in the 70s and 80s, they've probably forgotten about things like Red China and the Soviet Union, et cetera. It was very difficult to travel around the world in those days. So I went to China in 1984 to say, hello, I'd like to drive my motorcycle across your country because I want to go around the world. Looking back on it, I was totally nuts. I mean, Mao Zedong had only been dead for a few years at that time. They were still, quote, red communist, etc. Anyway, I went and said, can I do it? They said, the first word in Mandarin I learned was mayo, because no matter what I said, are there roads? Mayo. Are there hotels? Mayo. Is there gasoline? Mayo. What's wrong with you? You know, they didn't have anything. And they were right. I didn't know that. But when I got off the plane, I was really scared, because all my life, American propaganda had said the Chinese are horrible, terrible, bloodthirsty, vicious people, and you should be afraid of them. I figured I'd get shot when I got to Beijing. As I went around China in the 80s, I realized, oh my gosh, these people are hardworking, very hardworking, ambitious, educated. They discipline their children. They save their money. And I realized that China was on the rise. I also realized that China had been a great nation 3 or 4 times in its history. You know, Rome was great once. Egypt was great once. Great Britain was great once. But China had been great 3 or 4 times in its history. It had had catastrophe and collapsed 3 or 4 times in its history. But every time, after a few decades or a few centuries, somehow or another, they rose to the top again. And I could see that it was happening right before my eyes. I mean, everywhere I went, people were working from dawn to dusk and saving lots of money. So I could see there were changes taking place. Again, it's part of the experiences. If you see the world from the ground up, you get a lot different view than if you just read the newspaper or watch TV through some journalist's eyes. I mean, if you're close to the ground, you find out what's really happening. You cross a border in the jungle, you really find out what's happening. So, but I wanted adventure. I wanted to see the world. I knew that a motorcycle was the best way, at least the best way for me. So I did it. I shouldn't be alive, Roger. I should be dead, but fortunately, I'm not dead.
Very fortunately.
I'm glad I made it alive. I still have my arms and legs, so I'm very pleased.
That's very good. Yeah. Well, actually, this is about the long term. And by the way, for those of you who want to see what those books are, this is Investment Biker, and then this one here is Adventure Capitalist. And I wanted to share this. I mean, obviously, you've had many books out there, and this one is obviously with commodities. This one here I highly recommend, because it never really even occurred to me when I started my investing. In my investing journey, that commodities was an investable thing. But obviously you were one of the earliest to really be a proponent of commodities. And I just want to share this with everyone so everyone can see this one. This is now effectively with elements like an ETF. This is like the original Rogers International Commodities Index, where you put this together. And over time, we've just seen, like, this is actually over 1 year. If someone had looked at this a year ago when it was basically down at 584, it's pretty much doubled from where it's at. And even the last 3 months, you've seen this growth. And of course, what you're saying now about what people should be looking at in terms of what's happening with commodities, you were saying this all the way back, many decades ago as well. I'd love for you to just share to what extent was that insight because of the traveling you're doing, or was that something already that you had been looking at, just looking at the economics of what was happening in the world?
Well, ever since I've been investing, I always invested in everything: stocks, bonds, currencies, commodities, long and short. We used to sell short a lot, all over the world. So for me, none of this was new. It's what I always knew. But along I came in the 90s, I was on TV a lot talking about a bull market in commodities would be starting again. And we've had bull markets every 10 or 15, 20 years in commodities. Nothing unusual about it. And my publisher said, gosh, you're always talking about commodities, but aren't any commodity books? So I sat down and said, okay, we'll do a book about how commodities work, what they are, and how you can invest in them. It wasn't a hot tip book. It was a book explaining the commodities markets. That's how the book came about. But the investments came about because in the late 90s, I was about to go around the world again. I wanted to invest in commodities, but there were no ETFs. There were no commodity indexes worth investing in as far as I was concerned. So I had to come up with my own index, because it was my money that I was going to be investing. It wasn't somebody else. It was real money. So I came up with an index, and the ETF, and that's how it all happened. But most of my life, Roger's been one accident after another.
Being very modest there. with the shift to Singapore, for me it was 1997, and I was in London, and as you know, England has many skeptics, and I was like, I'm gonna go out to Singapore. And they were, why would you go to Singapore? It's like, well, Asia's the new growing place, and from Singapore, within 5-6 hours, you can get to half the world's population, right? And it's English speaking, so perfect for someone from England. And so I went out there in, I think it was July, and then August was the entire Asia crash. So that wasn't very good timing, but I stuck it out, and that kind of led to my first business there, and then led to my family growing up there, and one thing led to another, and of course, the whole of Asia has grown massively, Southeast Asia as well as China. I'd love to hear, the story of how you prepared, your family, your daughters all speak fluent Chinese, but at the same time you chose Singapore rather than China as your base. And I'd love to just hear your and by the way, our company Genius Group is also based in Singapore, so that's its headquarters. Would love to hear your rationale behind that, and obviously you still travel a lot, but you still believe that Singapore is the right place to have as a base?
Well, for 25 or 30 years, I was always on TV saying, teach your children Mandarin, because I could see what was happening in China. Now, of course, everybody said, no, Japan, right. Japanese. I said, no. China is the new country that's on the rise. So then I had a daughter. By the way, Roger, I never wanted children. I thought children were a horrible waste of time and money. I felt so sorry for my friends who ruined their lives by having children. I was never going to do something. I was wrong. It's a long story short, but I was totally wrong about children. And so when I had one, I said, oh gosh, now I got to teach her Chinese, because I've been telling people for 30 years. So we got her this Chinese governess, and she spoke great Mandarin, but people kept telling me, by the time she's 9 or 10 years old, she's not going to do it anymore. You're going to speak to her in Mandarin, she'll speak back to you in English, because it's not cool. So I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I got to take her to a country where she has to speak Mandarin. We looked at China. We went to several Chinese cities, but they were all so polluted. They were filthy. The air was filthy, the water, everything. And I didn't want to breathe the stuff. I didn't want her to breathe the stuff. Singapore looks great. I don't speak Chinese, so in Singapore they speak English and they speak Chinese, so it seemed great. So off we went to Singapore, since China was so polluted. And as you know, everything works in Singapore. It's a great place to live, certainly an easy place to live. New York is very exciting, but it's a hard place to live. Singapore, everything works. Very different from New York. So that's how we wound up in Singapore. I wanted my children to speak Chinese. I wanted them to know Asia, because Asia is going to be the 21st century. So there I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually quite amazing because over the last 2 decades, obviously Singapore itself has evolved a lot as well. And especially with what it's now doing to try and nurture more tech companies and to be able to be a good safe harbor for funds coming in from other parts of the world, given all the havoc that's out there at the moment as well. And on that point, there's like the difference of, let's say, Singapore and China. I have a few articles here I wanted to share with everyone, and I found this very interesting because with you invested in Tiger Brokers, and from what I understand, it was one of your first Chinese tech investments. And then, of course, Tiger Brokers evolved, it grew, it had its IPO, and now it's it's been up at the $1 billion level, and it really is like the Robin Hood of Asia, and in fact, global as well. And as you know, we have this partnership with Tiger for both this summit, as well as what we're doing with our own IPO, where they're now giving out the stocks that come with. So they're very innovative with the way they're doing things, and the way they've been mirroring quite a lot that's been happening with the US apps that are out there as well. But of course, for you to go down that line meant that you were feeling pretty bullish about the entire, not just Asian trading, but also the Chinese trading as well. And as we've seen, there's been a lot of changes that the Chinese government has been making to what is or isn't allowed with their own stock markets or even public companies as well. And it's not just, I'm not just talking specifically about China, but even what's happened recently with Russia, saying, okay, Russian, companies can no longer be listed as well. What's your overall view as to how, what was it originally that got you bullish about China? And are you still feeling the same way about it? Or have you modified your views based on what's going on in the world at the moment?
Well, when I went to China, I drove around China several times on my motorcycle in the 80s. I could see what was happening. I finally found a stock market. There was no stock market, but they opened a stock market 1988 or so. On one of my trips, I went down, knocked on the door and said, here I am, I want to buy shares, because since I've been investing in stocks for a few decades. Found the stock market, started investing in shares only really seriously in the late 90s. It was impossible before that, because I knew that someday, if you'd invested in America in 1899, you'd have been very, very happy. Well, here it was 1999, and I could see the possibilities of investing in the Chinese stock market. So I did so, and I have been doing so ever since. I was once in China speaking, and I came across Tiger, and I thought it was pretty strange what these guys were going to try to do from a Chinese base, but I could see that they were very smart guys. They had a lot of drive and they had vision, and if they could do it, they had to be successful, and it had to be a great thing to do. So there I was, and the same thing. I figure 50 years from now, my children will be very, very happy that I invested in China and that I invested in Tiger. You can ask me in another 40 years or so.
Yeah, very, 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 very interesting. I mean, like, again, I think a lot of people, whether they're in Europe or in the US, can't really appreciate the scale of China, just in terms of the population and the economy and the potential of where it's going as well. To what extent, with what we're seeing now in the world and the challenges going, I remember reading something you wrote once, which was that pretty much every country in the world has changed its borders in the last 200 years. So everything's always in constant flux and change. There's obviously many out there that believe that things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. What's your personal view as to what we should be expecting, or at least preparing for, with what's happening geopolitically around the world at the moment, specifically with what's happening with Russia, Ukraine, and the kind of escalations that are taking place right now?
Well, the Russian-Ukraine war is a little bit absurd. It really started because America engineered a coup in Ukraine in 2014, throughout the government, and put in a government that was friendly to the US and to NATO, and that has led to the current situation. I mean, I'm not suggesting the Russians are doing anything right. Nobody's doing anything right in Ukraine, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, but somebody should have and could have figured out a way to solve this problem, it seems to me. Unfortunately, now the gates of war have been unleashed, and it's not easy to close that gate once you open it. And I'm afraid that this is going to continue to have repercussions in Europe, certainly in America, certainly in Russia. It's interesting, Roger, that not many countries outside of Europe are supporting the sanctions, et cetera. So much of the world either is saying we don't care about it, or it's not clear cut who's right or wrong. In the US, of course, it's clear cut. The Russians are horrible people. The rest of the world often doesn't see things the way Washington, D.C. does, fortunately or unfortunately. And I'm afraid this is another period like that, when many people are questioning who's right and who's wrong here. As far as I'm concerned, they're both wrong. This is an insane war. It's going to ruin a lot of things. And of course, it's accelerating the inflationary movement, which is already underway in the world. And the way to protect yourself from inflation, the best way is in inflation, the prices go up. If you own the things that go up, you're going to get rich. You're certainly going to protect yourself. And so that's one of the reasons I started this commodity index decades ago. And I have a lot of investments in commodities now because I can see that the commodity bull market may have a long way to go.
Yes.
And partly because of Russia and Ukraine, because of the madness that's happening there. They're both huge producers of agriculture, hydrocarbons. I mean, they produce a lot of stuff that the world uses.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm flying this weekend. I'm flying back from US to London and then on to Warsaw in Poland, where I have been for the last 2 years with my girlfriend, like, you know, waiting out the pandemic. And when you see, I mean, like it just happened this week, you know, Russia cutting off all the gas to Poland, and immediately the difference in the actual fuel prices that are taking place right now as well. To what extent right now, given that there is all of this man-made turmoil that's taking place, so it's not even like, you know, like slow changes, they're happening immediately. To what extent is your approach to be looking at what you need to be doing to move into more those commodities that actually are like ending up having shocks put on them? To what extent are you like letting things ride out based on the fact that it's quite difficult to ever know exactly what the next move is people are going to be making?
Quite difficult? You mean it's not easy? Investing is not easy? I didn't know that. Oh,
well, maybe easy for you.
I'm glad you warned me. Commodities were in an up cycle anyway because of supply demand for a variety of reasons. Then along came gigantic amounts of money printing like the world has never seen, and borrowing and spending like the world has never seen. So we have to have a commodity bull market, it seems to me anyway. So I own the commodities and I plan to buy more. They're not going to stop printing money. When we start having corrections in the markets, the central banks are going to panic and print even more money. And we may have one last blow off in the stock market, and I do own some shares. I haven't started selling short yet, but after that blow off, I'm afraid we're going to have a horrible bear market, Roger. We've had bear markets throughout history. We've always had them. We'll have them again. And this bull market in America has been going on the longest in American history. It's 13 years now. Doesn't mean it can't go on 30 years, but it already is the longest. Stocks are getting high. Inflation's coming back. Interest rates are coming. So we're going to have a bear market again. And Roger, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime. 2009, 8, and 9, we had a bear market because of too much debt. Roger, since then, the debt has skyrocketed everywhere in the world, gigantic amounts. So the next bear market has to be a bad bear market. We've had them throughout history. They're going to continue, whether we like it or not, and the next one's going to be very bad.
Would you say that what was taking place after the global financial crisis, which was largely papered over through all the money printing that took place since then, that with the next bear market coming and the fact that the governments are running out of ammunition as to what they can throw at this, we're going to see casualties not just at the kind of individual level or the corporate level, but even at the government level? What do you see happening going forward from your view in terms of where the biggest casualties would be?
Roger, you say running out of ammunition. They're running out of trees. They're printing so much money, you know. How many trees they printed so much money? And you're right. I mean, what they can print and print and print, and they will. But eventually, the markets say, wait a minute, we've seen this game before. We know how this ends. And the market's going to take it away from them. We're going to have a bear market. Because prices will get too high, and you just cannot keep this going forever. You know, lots of smart people in the market, certainly smarter than the government. And once the market takes away from the central banks, interest rates are going to go very, very high, because inflation is going to be high. And that means we're going to have serious bear markets, and we'll have them everywhere. You know, in 2008 and 9, China had a lot of money saved up for a rainy day. Well, it started raining. They started spending their money and helped save the world. Even China has a lot of debt now. So I don't know who's going to save us, Roger. North Korea. North Korea doesn't have any debt, but they don't have any money either. So I don't know who's going to save us next time around. So it's going to be a bad bear market. But again, I hasten to say we've been having bear markets for hundreds of years.
Yes.
The people who figure it out and know and understand what's going on can come out successfully. There were people in the 30s who made a lot of money and came out of all that quite happy. So it can happen. Just be prepared, be knowledgeable of what you're doing.
Well, your company, well, the Quantum Fund that you co-founded, I felt it was following me around when I was in England in I think it was 1992, and the Quantum Fund shorted the pound and then and did very well out of it. But then, of course, we were all left picking up the pieces, and I was like, I'm going to go to Asia now, and then the Asian crisis they were also involved in as well. And I'm like, okay, where next? We're seeing, I mean, like the governments don't need any help now to actually create these crises themselves. And that's why there are, like, you know, a lot in the whole decentralized finance side that believe it could be the banks themselves that could actually start collapsing, or even the federal governments, where it could be the city governments that actually are picking up the pieces if they can't keep on taxing at the level they're taxing. And so there, you then could have the potential of Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency, maybe, you know, a central bank digital currency that could actually, you know, have something out of it. Obviously, the likes of Ray Dalio, who talks about, you know, like what's happening with China and the shift of the US dollar as a reserve currency at some point. Number one, two questions in that. Number one, do you see that the actual like rise of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, etc., could be something that people could look at as a store of value and as a hedge against the, well, they're obviously already having a hedge against dollar, but your view on that? And secondly, do you think it could be a government like China that, you know, figures out a way to kind of move into a different, you know, structure of money itself?
Well, to jump into something related, this war, talking about Ukraine and Russia, one of the things it's doing, unfortunately, for us as an American, it's, you know, many countries are looking for something to compete with the US dollar as a world's reserve currency for many reasons. One, the US is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. Nobody has ever had this much debt. And a world's reserve currency is supposed to be neutral. You're supposed to be using it for anything you want. Anybody can. But now, unfortunately, Washington has started playing different. You know, if they get mad at you, they cut you off. They put on sanctions. And so many people, even America's friends, are starting to say, wait a minute, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So they are looking for something to compete with, if not replace the US dollar. No world's medium of exchange has lasted more than 100 years, 150 years or so. The US dollar has been around a long time, so we're coming to the end of the line, whether we like it or not. But now Russia, China, India, Brazil, Iran, lots of people are trying to figure out what can compete with and therefore eventually replace the US dollar. And that is a bad consequence. I'm an American, so I don't like saying it, but I can see the writing on the wall. And since the Russian Ukraine situation arose, and they've accelerated it because the US just said, you cannot use, I mean, the Russians own a lot of US dollars, which they earned on their own. America's taking them away. Well, I mean, that's not, I certainly cannot justify that. And I am an American, as I say. And many other people are taking the same view. We have to find a replacement, or at least a competitor to the US dollar. Now, your question specifically about cryptocurrencies, and many people are working with crypto. I mean, I don't know if the numbers are accurate or not, but the numbers are pretty staggering. I certainly know people who've been trading cryptocurrencies quite successfully. I have never bought nor sold my wife is involved to some extent. But my view, Roger, is that, you know, the Chinese are ahead of the rest of us. In China, you cannot buy an ice cream unless your money is on the computer. You cannot use cash. You cannot use Chinese money to take a taxi. in China because they're so far ahead. But everybody's working on it. We will all have it eventually. All money will be on the computer. The U.S. is working on it. And someday when the U.S. says, okay, this is money now, I don't think, Roger, that the U.S. government is then going to say, okay, this is money, but you can use that money over there if you want to. I wish we could use anything we want, but that's not the way most governments and monopolies and bureaucrats think. They want to keep their monopoly in their control. So my view is that if cryptos become successful as currency, governments will do something to tax them or regulate them or outlaw them, who knows what. They've done it many times in history. So I have not been an investor in crypto. I mean, I wish I'd bought Bitcoin at $2. I wish I'd bought a lot of Bitcoin at $3, $4. I didn't, I never have. And my view is that if it's successful as currency, the governments will take action. It would be wonderful if they did let us use whatever we want. But you know, at one point, when in England, you could even, banks could print their own money illegally back in those days. But one day in the 30s, the Bank of England said, okay, from now on, it is an act of treason if you don't use our money. Yes. Well, Roger, treason means they execute you. So most people, needless to say, started following the government rules. I'm afraid that will happen again.
Right. Well, I mean, the point you made about trust in the system, like, as you say, when a government says, okay, well, you have that money, but actually we're not going to give it to you anymore, and they hold on to it, and we've seen that happen not just at the government level with Russia's reserves, but obviously all these oligarchs and those who went out there, whether they got the money the right way, the wrong way. The fact is, they own that yacht or they own that house, and it all got taken away. And governments got emboldened to say, yep, we're just going to take that. Thank you very much. And there is that question mark. I mean, we're seeing this happen with well-known entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, who will move out of California based on what the government's forcing him to have to do that he doesn't think is fair. So he'll then go down to Texas, et cetera, et cetera. The aspect of blockchain, which actually allows you to be able to link assets in a way that you can say, no, that really is mine, you can't take it away, right? Or we don't need a central body to be able to track it and so on. And obviously in commodity markets, people are looking at how do we start tracking things in a way that actually makes it easier with technology. This sense of trust or governments being emboldened to be able to take away our security if it suits them, do you believe that's also going to be a risk that we somehow need to be mitigating, especially yourself? You've got plenty of assets. Do you get concerned at all about the fact that they might come and see some of those assets that they feel like in the future?
Well, I hope everybody's concerned about that. I mean, governments, the history of governments all over the world is that they love to take people's assets, whether they should or not. And that is the way bureaucrats and politicians think, unfortunately. So everybody should be prepared for something going wrong. Everybody should have a plan B. Everybody should have some assets outside of their own country. If nothing else, they're great opportunities in other countries as well. But also you have to be concerned that something might go wrong. And especially these days with what you see, as you brought up, you can see the governments are taking assets from other people that are legitimately earned, and governments are just taking them away and say, okay, too bad for you. And it's hard to get those assets back when it happens. And it is forcing many people to reconsider having assets in US dollars. Again, I don't like saying it, but I can see it happening. And what we all need to be doing is figuring out, okay, what's the next currency? I don't know. If you know, Roger, please do not announce it today. Buy some and then and send me an email. Send me an email. I want to buy it too. I'm looking every day.
Right. Yeah, it's a funny world we live in, for sure. All of this, by the way, all of this is so fascinating because you're constantly learning, you're constantly like looking for what's changing. And I think there's a whole aspect about education itself that I want to touch on, because and we're going to come to a Q&A in a moment, but obviously everyone's here because they realize that the best defense for a changing world is to learn and to find out what's coming next, or at least be prepared as to what might be coming next. And so there's two aspects to this. One, I'd love to hear just for everyone who's on here, what you've been doing lately that you've found very valuable on the learning side. Maybe it's some books that you read that you think, okay, these are the kind of things you should be reading, or certain people you're following, you think, okay, they're doing a really great job on that. That's the first question. Second one is related to the book you wrote for your daughters, but I'm going to come on to that in a moment. But on that first part, any tips in learning or things to be looking at that's going to really help those who are looking to stay at the more informed edge of the learning curve for investing?
I want to feed in on something you said. You know, if people get knowledgeable, they will start getting worried about what's going on. The more you know about the world in 2024, 23, 24, the more worried you're going to get. Right. I assure you, the more you know, the more worried you're going to be. But if you get worried, then you get prepared. And if you're prepared, you might do very, very well, no matter what hits you. And by being prepared, do not listen to hot tips. One of the first things I learned in investing was do not listen to hot tips. Hot tips will bankrupt you. I mean, everybody wants a hot tip. Everybody wants to be rich this month. But I assure you, please stay away from hot tips. Invest in what you yourself know a lot about and you yourself understand. And then when something goes wrong, you'll know what to do. If I told you to buy something, you wouldn't know what to do. You wouldn't know what to do if it went up, and you wouldn't know what to do if it went down. You don't know why you own it in the first place. So my advice to everybody is stay with what you know, and then you will probably become a successful investor. But you have to know a lot about the world, especially in 2024, 25, because there are a lot of strange things happening, and it's not going to be fun for a lot of us. I hope I survive. I hope we all survive. So I will learn from Roger. We will all learn. I hope, so that we can all survive. But I do want to emphasize again, Roger, we've had bear markets since the beginning of time. And so people need to understand, you said, what am I doing? I am constantly looking at the world, partly because I'm fascinated by the world, but partly because I want to find new places. There's always some place going up, and there's always some place going down, whether it's a company or a country or a family, no matter what. So I am constantly looking for. I bought some shares in Uzbekistan recently because I hope I see dramatic positive changes taking place in Uzbekistan. I mean, it's not a big market, but it's a new market, which makes it even more interesting and exciting for me because there's not a lot of people there yet. That's mainly what I'm doing these days, looking for currencies and other markets, because I mean, the US market's near an all-time high. Many markets are near all-time highs. I prefer buying things that are in distress. I would be buying Russia right now. Right. I have learned that when you buy a country at war or civil war, if you have staying power, you usually are going to make a great success. Well, I cannot invest in Russia right now. I can't. In Venezuela, Iran, there are other countries. I'd love to be doing something in Venezuela. I'd love to be doing something in Iran, but I cannot because I'm an American citizen. Yes. You know, I'm a citizen of the land of the free. I'm afraid we're not so free like we used to be. Free money. People can find disasters. Investing in disaster is often a good way to go. Right, right. Yeah. The whole aspect of being able to be able to like see the imbalances, but then actually through obviously wherever we do invest, that that money flows in that place, and then actually rights those balances as well. And so I'm a real great believer that entrepreneurs, investors, have a really important constructive part to play in how we actually leave the world a better place through the actions that we actually take.
the book you wrote, A Gift to My Children, A Father's Lessons for Life Investing, which was kind of like written for your children. Your take on education. I mean, obviously our entire group is about education, and it's specifically about entrepreneurial education, right? And it's not just for those adults who are thinking, okay, we didn't learn this at school. It's actually for school as well. And that's why we just acquired, high school or university, so we can build financial literacy, and more importantly, teach those out there to be self-sufficient, so they don't have to go get a job if they know how to create their own job and do what they really love in life as well. And that's not an easy thing, because lots of people say that's something that's needed, but there aren't that many people out there trying to actually make it happen at the moment, because it's complex and there's a lot of government regulations in education and so on. Writing that book and actually like deciding to put that information in there, I'd love to get your sense as to what was the most rewarding parts about putting that wisdom down the way you were doing it, and what is your take in terms of what you believe the future of education should be for all of us?
Well, education is extremely important. I mean, education is what yanked me out of the backwoods of Alabama and got me wherever I am and wherever I'm going. So I cannot believe how big a supporter of education I am in all aspects. So please keep doing what you're doing. And I hope everybody realizes how important education is and supports it. This all started with, since I never had these children, I kept thinking of things I wanted to make sure they knew when they were adults. And so that's how the book evolved. So somebody said, why don't you make it a book? So I wrote it down of lessons. It's obviously not for children. A 9-year-old probably would not understand much of what's in the book. It's a book for grown-ups, but it's certainly something that I hope that my children, when they're 28 or whatever, will read and understand and get something from. It obviously has stuff about investing too, because I do want everybody should understand money. I think everybody has seen many families or individuals, companies' lives who get destroyed because they don't understand money and they don't understand investing. And we all must understand money in order to have stable lives ourselves and successful lives. So education about finance and education about everything is very important. It teaches you about the world and what's going on, but certainly about money and finance is extremely important. The amount of financial illiteracy that exists in the world is still mind-boggling to me, and I'm sure to you as well. So first of all, you're doing a good thing, because I know that there's a huge market. There's a huge market for what you're trying to do, because there's so many people who don't understand finance and investing. So my advice to you is keep up the good work. If you do a good job, you're going to be unbelievably successful, because the world needs you. And that's why I wrote this book for my kids. That's how it all started. So
very good.
I wanted them to understand that money is to be saved, not to be spent. When they were babies, I got them piggy banks. And whenever they got some money, I took them to the piggy bank and put it in the piggy bank, so that they would grow up thinking, oh, when you get money, you're supposed to put it in the bank, not spend it. I hope that lesson sinks into them when they're adults and they don't get in trouble.
Sure, absolutely. Well, a fantastic book, and yeah, very, very good to hear your thoughts on education and where that's going. And again, I guess this is the thing, it's lifelong learning. It never stops, right? So it's about just having that learning mindset as well going forward. I actually have a whole number of questions. I know we're not going to get through all of them because there's so many of them, but I'm going to pick certain questions here and just get your thoughts on it. I have a question here from Janina here. She says, this is a question where she's saying, my husband heard you, Jim, many years ago when you were traveling, and said that there will be a time when at parties, farmers will be in focus and bankers will be hiding in the corners. Do you think this is going to happen soon? Will smaller farmers be allowed to exist, or will they be forced into big corporations? And I'll add an extra point to that. I saw where you were saying some of the biggest commodity investments are, and one big one is agriculture, right? So this is all directly linked to this question as well.
Well, agriculture has been a disaster for a long time, and disasters often lead to investment opportunities. In China, they have a word, Wei Ji, it means disaster and opportunity, the same thing. By the way, the Japanese have that word, the Koreans have that word. Asians been around a long time, and they know that disaster, can lead to opportunity, and it's something we should all learn as well. Well, agriculture has been a big disaster for a long time. The average age of farmers in America is 58. In Japan, it's 66. The highest rate of suicide in the UK is in agriculture. More people in America study public relations than study agriculture. So either agriculture is going to change, or we're not going to have any clothes to wear, we're not going to have any food to eat. So, and I can see changes taking place. So yes, I see great opportunities in agriculture, if you like it. I mean, I'm not going to become a farmer because I'd be hopeless. I would fail. But if you like being outdoors and getting dirty or whatever, then you should think about agriculture, because there are fantastic opportunities developing in agriculture as we speak. And my way is to invest in agriculture, but if you love it, go do it. Learn it. Can you drive a tractor, Roger?
I cannot drive a tractor, and I'm waiting for the robot tractors to all arrive. But
well, living in Singapore is not much use to drive a tractor.
That's true. That's true.
People who live elsewhere might consider becoming a farmer.
Very good. Okay, I have a question from Andrew here. Interesting question. At the start of the 21st century, you predicted the rise of the East and the shift to China and Asia, as we've been talking about. First 20 years or so has proved this. But will it continue in the same way? Do you not think China may have peaked? And what about the rest of Asia? Many thanks. So that's from Andrew. Yeah, what's your thoughts on that? And if I could just add an extra piece on that, even not just the momentum of economically what can be done, but even how the Chinese government have their own views as to what they want to cap or what they want to be directing or managing as well, really.
Well, as I look around, I don't see anybody else besides China, but that doesn't mean China's not going to have problems. America was the most successful country in the 20th century, but along the way, we had a horrible civil war. We had many depressions with a D. We had massacres in the streets. We had many problems, but we became a great success. So China will certainly have problems. They're going to have some bankruptcies now, and the government says they will let people go bankrupt. I wish in America we would let people go bankrupt. It will certainly be good for China and good for the world if people get into trouble and they let them go bankrupt. So yeah, we'll certainly have plenty of problems in China, but that's the way the world works. Chinese government has been cutting back on some things, but there's been a huge property bubble in China for a while. Now, Beijing is doing something about it. They talked about it for a while, but now they're actually acting, and people are going bankrupt. That's got to be good for any country that has a big property bubble. So some of the things that are happening are, in my view, going to be problems for a while, but in the end will be good. And Roger, I don't know if the Chinese government's the best government in the world. I'm sure they're going to make as many mistakes as every government does. But so far, they've been a very successful government in the past 40 years. And I would suspect, I don't see anybody else on the horizon who can do with the clout that China has, because they're a big country. I mean, once Korea opens the 38, once the DMZ opens in Korea, it's going to be extremely exciting, but it'll never have the clout that China does because it's not nearly as big.
Yeah. Can I add to that? India and Africa. That question actually came up from someone who is in Africa, from Tosin, who's actually in Africa right now, I believe. What's your views on those two continents in the context of Southeast Asia and China?
Well, if you can only visit one country in your life, you should go to India, because there's no country like it. The people, the food, the culture, the man-made sites, the natural sites. Oh my gosh, there's nothing like it. It also has the worst bureaucracy in the world. I mean, the Indians learned bureaucracy from the English, and then they took it to a higher plane. So you can imagine how bad bureaucracy is in India, but there's some fantastic things in India, and I love India a lot. I don't see it being the next China. I mean, in 1980, India was much richer than China. You know the rest of that story, that now China has run circles around them. So I would continue to, if you know some smart Indians, by all means invest in them, but be careful of the government. But Africa, I mean, there are more than 50 countries in Africa, Roger, so it's hard to give you a simple answer. But there are great fortunes going to be made in Africa if you can find the right country at the right time. I mean, I have started investing in Ghana because I see changes taking place. I recently bought some shares in Zimbabwe, which is, oh, what a disaster that is. You know, 100 years ago, Zimbabwe, it was Southern Rhodesia, was what we called them, were one of the most successful countries in the British Empire. Along came a dictator who ruined the country, but it's a disaster now. So there may be opportunities whenever there's a disaster. It has been successful in the past, but you have to be. Rwanda, I mean, I hope to go to Rwanda soon. I see the government says many of the right things, but they say some wrong things too. So there are great opportunities in Africa, but you can't just say Africa. You got to pick which of the 50 odd countries you're going to invest in and why. And like the rest of the world, they all change. They get better, they get worse. So be careful.
It's actually very interesting when we went to Zimbabwe, and the amount of adoption of people buying cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin because of the currency being in such strife, and like when we have a resort in a game lodge in South Africa, and at the time when we bought it, everything was fairly stable. Then obviously South Africa's had like some major crises through the pandemic as well. So it's incredible just the turbulence that can actually happen between the different countries as well. Luckily, I saw that calm down a little bit now as well. And that actually is leading on to another question here. I've just got like 2 more questions, and then from there, I'm gonna kind of wrap it up here and say a big thank you for your time here. This question's an interesting one because it comes from someone called Anonymous Attendee, and it starts urgent question for Jim. And then it says, what are the top 3 suggestions you would give to someone who has lost everything and has to start again today? Which, who knows, maybe this person actually is in exactly that situation. And from your travels around the world, this might be even more of a philosophical question as well. Yeah, if you lost it all tomorrow, Jim, what would be like top 3 things you would do from that place?
Well, I certainly did lose it all once when I was early in my career. Actually, I made a great success and thought I was so smart. And then 6 months later, I lost it all. Just shows you how being cocky can ruin you. Don't believe you're smart because the market will show you you're not so smart. So my first advice to whoever that is, okay, you could become a priest or you can run away. You know, there are many things you can do. My urgent advice is figure out what you love the most and then pursue it and start over, because you can. If you do what you love the most, you will certainly be successful. Those are the people who are successful. And if you're not successful, it doesn't matter. You're happy. You're doing what you love. So it's quite good to be happy, because then you don't care about whether you're the richest or not the richest. So figure out what you love, start over, save your money, and start again, because many people have lost everything, some once, some twice. I mean, there are many stories about people who have been bankrupt once or twice who become fabulous, fabulous successes. So don't despair. Find what you love the most and pursue it. And someday, Roger will call you to interview you as well. Maybe Roger will hire you to teach as well.
We're open for everyone to teach, including you, Jim. When you're next back in Singapore again, we'd love to invite you down to our Junior Central, where we actually have got a whole community of entrepreneurs there as well. There is one final question. This one is straightforward in the way it's written, but I want to add a bit to it. Is from Janina, who says, what is the name of the commodities EFT that Jim Rogers created, and how can I buy it? So actually, it's more an ETF than an EFC, but basically, I can answer that one. That's Elements, which is linked to the Rogers International Commodities Index, which is RICI. And if you're on any trading exchange, you should be able to go search for it and find it. And my question really off the back of that is, are you planning on any additional indexes or ETFs in the near or even medium future?
Well, we created these ETFs, ETNs. They trade on the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, there's one for the overall index, there's one for agriculture, there's one for metals, and there's one for energy. So there are actually 4 of them. You pick your choice. If you happen to be more bullish on energy than metals, you can do that, or you can invest in the whole index. I don't have any
what are the other ones called, Jim?
One is called Rogers International Index, or the symbols are RJI, RJA, RJN, and RJZ, RJZ. They're all the Rogers something index. They're all on the New York Stock Exchange, so it should be very easy for anybody in the world to buy them. You don't have to worry about liquidity because they're ETNs, and with an ETN, they will create as much as you need if a big order comes in. That's one of the beauties about exchange traded products. So that's what I do anyway. These indexes have outperformed all the other commodity indexes, and we will see. I just want to go back to one other country that I didn't mention in Africa, and that's Botswana. Botswana is a place where I have invested in the past, but there are many stories in Africa. As I say, there are over 50 countries, so you can find your good news or your bad news. And my advice again is, listen to Roger or somebody and become knowledgeable, because the knowledgeable people are the ones who are going to succeed when things get really, really bad.
Jim, it's been a pleasure having you. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and thank you so much for making it. It's been wonderful, and I know everyone just took away a huge amount from what you shared. So thank you very much, Jim Rogers.
Well, let's do it again sometime, Roger. It was fun. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks very much.